Start letting people in, Scott. Hello, everyone. I see that we have folks entering the room now. I see Vim. So we have some regulars. I see some new names that I don't recognize. If you want to let us know where you're calling in from, where you're dialing in from, you can drop that in the chat. That'll also be a chance to let us know and see us and hear us, and everything's coming in looking good and sounding clear. Scott's in Brookline. I am also in Boston. Jerry, you're in Southie, correct?
That is correct.
Very nice. Someone from Indy. All right. Chapel Hill. Very nice. It's good to have. Oh, and London. That's the farthest away, I think, from us right now. Let's see if anyone can top that. We'll get started in just one more minute. So feel free to get some questions going. Same format as usual, where we'll do Q&A and then we'll open it up to our audience. But it looks like we are ready to go. So welcome to One Quick Thing, everyone. I'm Caitlin Milliken, IL's multimedia editor.
And I'm Scott Kersner, CEO and co-founder of Innovation Leader, and we're really glad that you could be with us today.
A super quick overview of Innovation Leader before we introduce our featured guest for today. Innovation Leader has created the world's biggest network of innovators who work inside big organizations, and we produce content, research, and gatherings like this one to help them learn from peers and deliver impact at their organizations.
And One Quick Thing is a chance to connect with a group of innovators from around the world. We'll get the conversation warmed up in the first 15 minutes, and then we'll give you 15 minutes to ask questions of your own.
We should also give a big thank you to the sponsor of today's episode, PatSnap.
PatSnap is an AI solution that collects information from databases around the world, from Asia to Europe, Europe to the US, and everywhere in between, making IP and R&D insights accessible to all. PatSnap helps you make sense of the unknown, turn data into intelligence, and make the decisions that shape our world. You can find out more about them at patsnap.com.
Thanks, Scott. If you're a frequent viewer, you might realize that Scott and I have switched roles for the day. So today, Scott will be keeping an eye on the chat stream. If you have questions, advice, or comments, feel free to chat away and we'll try our best to weave those in. If you want to jump in via video in the second half of our meeting, let us know that in the chat as well. Now to get started, I'm very excited to have Jerry Gupta, the Senior Vice President and Digital Catalyst at SwissRe, as our guest. Swiss is a reinsurance company based in Zurich, Switzerland. The organization has spent 25 years on the Global 500 list. Jerry has been working at SwissRe since 2017. In his role, he leads the company's innovation and venture arm that involves looking for new technologies, exploring ecosystems, and seeking new business models. Jerry, it's so great to have you with us today.
Happy to be here, Caitlin. Thank you for having me.
Great. So to kick us off, can you tell us a little bit more about your role and where you sit in SwissRe?
Absolutely. So Caitlin, I work under the silo of SwissRe Institute, which is the research underwriting and development arm of SwissRe. My role is leading exploratory research for certain segments, mostly P&C, and I sit at the intersection of data science and technology. So projects or new solutions, new innovation related to digital data-driven ecosystems. That's where I come into the picture.
Great. So you are doing a lot of exploration and research. What's the process for identifying new technology that might make a difference at the organization? And how do you determine what fits your strategy?
So there are different elements to this, Caitlin. At the high level, what we have is, we scan the internal environment and we consume pain points from our organization. We scan the external environment. We look at the direction where the industry is going, the market is going, where new risk is coming about, what the new emerging risks are, and then we try to understand, what's the best risk technology framework for those new risks. Is it a new product? Is it a new solution? Is it simply education? Is it mitigation? So we look at that, and then once we come to that, then we do sort of an analysis of what is the best or most optimal way to either productize it or create a solution around that, right? So it could be a new product, it could be a new solution, and it could simply be a publication that educates people on the new risk, right? So just calling attention to the new risk, that is a successful outcome for us as well.
Great. So when you have something new and you're sort of looking at those outcomes, what are the metrics that your team cares about the most? What are the metrics that are very important?
Typical metrics, right? Nothing new, which is if it's a new product, you always look at the market size. You look at what similar products exist, how they overlap in what you're doing, and then you look at what kind of distribution you're going to have, right? So I think the metrics change based on the kind of solution we're having, right? So we don't have typical metrics which a startup would have, which is new customers per month, retention, engagement, because we are earlier stage. We are conceiving ideas. Most of my metrics that I focus on are more milestone based, which is how much progress have we achieved. When we set out, we had a project plan. How rapidly and how exhaustively are we achieving our objectives in that space, right? So I would say it's more milestone based objectives. But one thing I would highlight is, we really look to validate our ideas early. So getting to failure as quickly as possible is an objective. So we don't, there's so many different ideas we're working on at any given time. We tend not to spend too much time on products or solutions that have sort of, a lot of, for the lack of better word, objections or red flags or things of that nature, right? So we don't try to push things through that seem a little bit premature.
That's really interesting. So another part of your role involves building partnerships with startups, other large organizations. Obviously, the face-to-face element that everyone is so used to has gone away over the past 6 months. What exactly does that ecosystem building aspect of your role look like today?
I think to a certain extent, the new environment hasn't really changed the way we work. Most of our partners are agile, they are remote as well, so they're used to working with that. There was a little bit of a lag in the early part of March, April, but I think we are full speed right now. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that when we look at partners, we spend a lot of time sort of looking at what kind of partners we need to work with, right? So I have what I call the law of mutuality, right? Which is even before we go too much far down, we look at, okay, do we have mutual interests? Do we have mutual vision? Do we have mutual goals? Do we have is there any mutual benefit from this project? Are we willing to take mutual risks? And are we willing to make mutual effort, right? So when you have this level of alignment that you go into when you are starting partnerships and projects together, then it's you don't feel like it's an external partner because you're so aligned. It's much easier to work because they are as motivated to work with you as you are with them, because both of us see the benefits. Uh, at least my team, especially me, we tend not to get into the vendor-customer relationship at all, because when it comes to product development, code development, things of that nature, we just haven't seen that work too well in the past.
It's interesting that you mentioned the idea of alignment, since there's obviously aligning with these folks that are in your ecosystem, but also staying aligned with headquarters is really important. You're based in Boston. The company's headquarters is in Zurich. How do you stay connected with HQ, especially right now?
So I think at SwissRe that has not been a problem. We have been, we have a philosophy called "Own the Way You Work," and we've had that for several years now. So employees have had the ability to work remotely for a very long time, and we have built the infrastructure, the technology tools like video conferencing and things of that nature. So I don't think that has been a problem. Um, you know. What happens when you are launching and working on new product and solutions, it's not what really matters is communication, right? Because you are doing something new, you want to have as many touch points, as many conversations with different stakeholders as possible. And I find those are the kind of one-on-one personal interactions, physical interactions, that I think go a really long way. And that I think has suffered to a certain extent. But I think people are cognizant of the fact that those kind of things are not possible. So there are some optimizations that we make all the time, but things are moving well at this point.
Great. I want to transition to talk a little bit about some of the focus areas that you have. I know that you've worked a lot with big data and AI. What are some things that you've learned or tips that you have for other teams that might be working on those types of projects?
Yeah, so I think the big data is projects are sort of seductive, and people tend to sort of have unreasonable expectations, right, when it comes to data analytics projects. And one of the things I always tell my students and my co-workers when you're working on data science projects is to have realistic expectations, right? And um, focus not on the model. That's the easy part. Focus more on the early pieces, which is, what are you going to do? What is the objective? What's the decision you need to make, right? Because those are the most important things. 85% of models don't even get deployed. So unless you have a path to deployability, I suggest to people, don't even embark on the exercise, right? So you need to have a path to deployability where the person or the team which is going to use the model has fully bought in and is willing to make the changes that are going to be required on their side to deploy the model, right? So that requires multiple things. So, you have to explain the value proposition right up front, right? Which is, what is the value you want to extract and what are the decisions you're willing to make? You need to be able to talk about the project, not just in a logical manner, but also have the emotion behind it, right? So it's almost like an agile, because by and large, people don't make decisions based on logic. They base decision based on alignment of interest and all of those things, right? So you need to have that narrative when you come on why this project is important for the organization and for your team. And then it's about prioritization, right? Which is, are you getting the right data? Do you have the capabilities to manage the data? What's your where do you lie in terms of explainability versus efficacy? Which means, are you in a regulated environment? Which means you probably need an explainable data, explainable model, which means you need to have simpler models, right? So all are some of the early decision points we try to get to before we advance too much.
Great. I see that we're starting to get some questions from our participants, Jerry. So thanks for those answers. I'd love to shift into the audience participation half of the show. So I see there are at least 1 or 2 questions in the chat. If you have other questions you'd like to ask Jerry, you can drop those in the chat window. and let us know. If you want us to ask the question for you, we can do that. Otherwise, we'll throw it to you and you can jump into the conversation. But first, we want to launch a poll about sort of how you and your organization try to understand the landscape of emerging technologies. What do you invest the most time and resources in? And you should see a separate Zoom window popping up that has a poll that says emerging technology. We always love to get high voter turnout in these polls. So look for that window and give us a quick answer. We're just kind of interested in where you spend the most time and resources. Is it in setting up individual meetings? Is it demo days, whether they're online or in person? Perhaps you have an incubator, an accelerator program that you run, or maybe you don't do much scouting externally. We have just about 56% participation. While you vote, Katie's going to share a little bit more about today's sponsor, PatSnap.
Thanks, Scott. PatSnap has a really amazing, new offering that lets you get an overview of any company's innovation strategy instantly, whether it's a competitor, a potential partner, or a startup, or an industry pioneer for inspiration. PatSnap helps you track and monitor key technology and commercial investments, strategic focus areas, innovation strengths and weaknesses, and valuable patents. You can check out that at connectedinnovation.io. PatSnap will also be running a masterclass, which is a webcast with us next Wednesday that focuses on 5 trends in the food industry. And we'll share the link for that in the chat. So it looks like we have about 70% of folks who have voted in this poll, which is great. So we'll end that and we'll share the results with most 38% of folks saying that they're setting up individual meetings with startups, which is really interesting. Jerry, when it comes to the different techniques of getting to research new technology or understand what's in your ecosystem, what have you historically found to be good ways of doing that?
So we do a mix of different activities. So it's startup engagement. So we have a partnership with Plug and Play in California. So we're a big part of that. We do a lot of collaboration with universities. So we are a big partner of. We do have a large partnership with MIT, Stanford, and some of the universities. So we find that to be pretty useful. But I think tech partnership is as much of a science as an art, and so it's simply a question of knowing your internal use cases and needs really well before you go out to engage, because otherwise, there's just so much out there. You waste a lot of time spinning your wheels just because there are really cool technologies out there, and unless you know what exactly you can deploy internally or what exact product or solution you're going to create, you can go into multiple rabbit holes and not get anything done.
Great. So I'd love to give Danielle the first question. She posed a really interesting question in the chat about how showing the value of intangible results. And Danielle, I should apologize because you are in Brussels, the true cultural capital of Europe, not Paris.
Hello, so my name is Danielle. Thank you for this presentation, very inspiring. I work for BNP Paribas on the Risk Innovation Office, and I have a question because we are struggling right now as innovation team to show the value of intangible assets, like the value of networks, the value of connections. Some management are asking us, for example, okay, you know a lot of people or you connect with a lot of people, but so what? Do you have this kind of measure, or how do you show the value of intangible things that you have to do to make your project succeed, but that are not really how can I say, tangible?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Danielle. And I think for folks like us who are on the early stage business side, tangible KPIs actually are a detraction as opposed to a big help, right? I mean, they actually undermine your efforts. So, like you mentioned before, right, one of the KPIs that I like to use a lot is milestone-based KPIs, right, which is to say, these are the things we set out to achieve, and this is what we have achieved. These are the projects we said we're going to work on. This is where we are. These are the projects that are ongoing, and these are the projects that have been killed. And then, one of the things that I'm a big advocate of is accountability. So you have accountability for success, accountability and responsibility for success, but you also have accountability for projects that are killed, right? So, in most organizations, killing projects is really easy. And so we are trying to create an accountability mechanism where we say, okay, if you're not giving the go ahead for this project or you're blocking the project, we need to know that, document the reasons. So if 6 months down the line, Google comes up with this thing, we say, hey, we were 6 months ahead, we didn't do it because of this, right? So I'm being facetious, but I think, KPIs are really important, but one thing to consider is you get what you measure. So if you're measuring garbage, you're going to get garbage. A lot of the KPIs that I've seen in organizations are sort of quantitative focused KPIs that are not fully aligned with what that group needs to do. So when you are a early stage group, you're going to fail in about 95% of the things you do, and so you have traditional KPIs, you're going to look really bad, right? So the first thing I try to do is not when it comes to KPIs or projections of overall benefit to the company, don't look at projects in silo, but or as individuals, but group them in a portfolio, and then we track it by portfolio. Say, this is the portfolio we're working on, got 5 projects, 10 projects on it. This is how it's tracking, because that 9 out of those 10 projects are going to fail, but that one project is going to have some benefits, right? So just because it's intangible doesn't mean it's not valuable. Right, and so if you look at the whole decision space, right, it's decisions, objectives, constraints, and so if you the traditional KPI framework is solely predicated on objectives, but if you also add improvements in decisions and reductions or improvement in constraints, you can still make qualitative things sound quantitative or objective.
Thank you very much.
All right, thanks for the question, Danielle. So Jody says she would like us to ask her great question about whether anyone has innovated on their process for handling inbound vendor inquiries or maybe startup inquiries. She says, in a post-COVID environment, we've been slammed with a high volume of sales calls, and then our internal people keep sending the lead gen emails around to each other. It's kind of a mess and not optimized for our needs. So she's curious, Jerry, how you guys handle this, sort of preventing a vendor or startup from pinging everyone they can possibly reach, on LinkedIn or on email. And if other folks, Maureen has already chimed in on that question, but if other folks on the call want to chime in the chat, please do that. But I'll give you first crack at that question, Jerry.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, Maureen, and I don't think I found anyone who solved it. I mean, we did have a dedicated team that was supposed to be doing this, but then we realized that when you're on LinkedIn, vendors and your connections don't always know your exact role, so they're going to when they want to reach into an organization, they'll find their first or second connection and they'll reach out directly. So I almost think it's impossible to stop unless you sort of set the parameters of LinkedIn as such. So long answer short, we don't have an answer. I don't know how you can solve this, but I think the person who solves this is going to do a lot of us a whole lot of good.
Yeah, it's either an opportunity for LinkedIn product improvement or a startup to help channel those inquiries to the right place. Let's see. There was another question from Jesse a little bit earlier that I'll pose to you, Jerry. Can you share some examples of successful AI projects and maybe some trials in SwissRe that weren't so successful? So Jesse's looking for examples of stuff that you feel like is going to move the needle, has high potential, versus stuff that maybe you've piloted and didn't really go anywhere?
Yeah, so instead of just focusing on SwissRe, I'll just speak in generalities of my general experience in deploying AI and data science solutions, right? So, first of all, you have to define what success and failure mean, right? A lot of models that I've seen which have a very high degree of accuracy don't get deployed because you don't have the right infrastructure, right? So a lot of it is infrastructure problems. A lot of it is interpretability problems where you're not deploying things because you can't explain it to regulators. But my philosophy is very simple. I don't do any hands-on modeling anymore. But when I used to do hands-on modeling, every model I built started with a simple either logistic or linear regression. That was the first thing I did because you get so much understanding of the data, how it is behaving, what the trends are, looking at that, and then you build upon that, right? And then you get into complex things. So, we did a project a few years ago at one of the companies I was in, and we were looking at ways to improve customer satisfaction. And we had a really good team who were doing a lot of direct interaction with the clients, but the problem was the existing models were just using too many variables. And when you have too many variables, if it's a digital environment, it's fine, but if it's an operational environment, it's really difficult to deploy that solution. So for example, if your job is to respond to customers and you have to tweak 60 different things that you do, it is really difficult. You'll probably fail in that exercise. But if I tell you there are two things you should do differently while talking to the clients, and you'll have a successful outcome, that has a much higher probability of succeeding. And that's what we did, right? So we reduced the number of variables from a very large number to, I think it was just a handful. And our customer satisfaction went up, right? In terms of unsuccessful projects, right? I mean, like I said, in data science, either you have a hypothesis that fails, or you have a hypothesis that doesn't get used. By that I mean, you start with a hypothesis, you start building models, and then it gets disproven, which is not a failure. Or you build a successful model, which is really good, but you're not able to deploy it because of extraneous reasons, which theoretically is failure. And it happens all. I think to a certain extent it's unavoidable. But like mentioned before, right? One of the first things you do if you're a shared service environment or any data science team, when you start on a project, you should have full line of sight into deployability, which is to say, what will this model be used for? What will be the output of this model be used for? Do you need to explain this model, or you can create neural networks or complex models? Are you okay with that? Once we do create the model, what kind of model can be deployed? I think you solve a lot of problems, but I'll go even further than that, right? Even before you start on a model building journey, you should ask yourself, do we really need to build it? Can we just use an API? Especially if you're doing vision recognition or natural language processing, I always encourage people to use an API because Google and others have already built it. They have really good systems. Just use an API. You'll save yourself a lot of problems. And then if you really want to build something, see if something already exists that you can repurpose. And if none of those are, then you start from scratch. So,
let me see, Jerry, if I can get one last question in here. And maybe it's asking you, if you could summarize in call it 30 seconds, what is the value prop of your group for SwissRe? And has that value prop changed? Is it different in September than it was in January? How do you capture the value prop, and to what extent has it changed?
Yeah, so I think, and these are my own words. I think the value prop that I think we have is, we look around corners and break through walls, right? Which is because we don't have an operational mandate, we can afford to look a little bit further down the road. So, we have the ability to do some of the more complex, esoteric things that the business units may not be able to do. just because they have operational pressures and other pressures. In terms of change because of what's happening, I think to a certain extent, it demonstrates the value of groups such as ours, not just in our organization, in every organization, because it demonstrates that, you know, the world can change around you so fast, so rapidly, without warning, that unless you have a wide-ranging set of competencies, wide-ranging, you know, a lot of irons burning in the fire, you could be left being in a business which doesn't exist anymore, right? And so I think the ability to look at problems and see those as opportunities, or at the very least as a mechanism to demonstrate your thought leadership in the market, I think to us is really valuable. And I think we've been able to demonstrate our value in that regard as well.
Great. Well, we are unfortunately just at the 30-minute mark, so I want to thank everyone for their questions. And Jerry, I want to thank you for your time. This was fantastic, and you covered a lot of ground. Katie has some questions, some announcements about our next One Quick Thing meeting before you log off. So I'll turn things over to her.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I want to mention our next episode of One Quick Thing with Jody Brinkerhoff. Jody is the VP Innovation at Dallas Fort Worth International Airport. During the conversation, she'll discuss how the travel is innovating during a global pandemic, including how they've enabled folks to fly safely at this time. You can sign up for that call at innovationleader.com/onequickthing. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much, Jerry, for being really generous with your time, and Scott for hosting this call with me. And thanks to our sponsor at PatSnap. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thanks, Caitlin. Thanks, Jerry. We'll see ya.
Thank you.